How has bottom surgery improved your self-image and views on yourself? I feel free. I feel closer to being myself. I feel like a core issue that I've been struggling with in the past 28 years was just resolved immediately. It helped me with energy. It helped me with self-confidence. It made me realize that I can dress more feminine. Don't have to cry when I look at myself naked. I don't have to worry about like my in-between anatomy to like touch my skin and whatnot. It always made me feel yucky. How bad was the recovery? That's the one that scares me. All the first 6 days, 7 days, they were hell. It got better really, really quickly. Like once all the stuff is removed, once the packing inside is removed, dilating is like really uncomfortable in the beginning because you're still healing. And it feels like you're kind of burning. But yeah, like you're going to get through it. I just hope everything is going well. I just hope everything is going to be fine and there aren't any complications. Hearing that your dysphoria was just gone was very fascinating, important information. Yeah, that's the fascinating thing. It's like I can tell people it's like, oh, so I struggled with this all my life. And then I had the surgery and everything. Like it was a core issue that was just like resolved. That was just like, you know, patched out and it fixed so many different areas of my life. And then people turn around and they're like, no, you fell for Big Pharma. No, it was just Big Pharma propaganda. Nah, you're actually not happy. Actually, you're not happy. You're actually miserable. I think a channel called Powered by Rainbows is where I first heard about it. But many MRIs have shown that basically the brain is opposite sex of the body or something like that. I heard a lot of mixed things about it because it's more that like once you're on HRT, it's like your brain is closer to that of the opposite sex. It hasn't been properly researched yet, so people don't actually like know if this is actually like a good talking point, you know? Like it's the same with like finding the gay gene. There doesn't seem to be as much info about this topic as there should be. Yeah, I fit in with other women. It doesn't matter if they're cis or trans. I don't necessarily fit in with other men. And that has been like all my life. I have conversations with like therapists and like other women and they're like, oh, you know, the way you're like speaking about things, the way you're like behaving and whatnot, you're already a woman, like even before transitioning. A lot of my friends always like use that as like a point to like bully me because they're like, oh, you're acting like a woman. Yeah, it sounds so misogynistic and whatnot. Like I don't want to like use that as like a justification for me being trans and me being well because like I'm just a woman. Euphoria, yeah, exactly. It's gender affirming misogyny and I don't like it. It's yucky. I was like fascinated by it with like, oh, the brain waves actually match that of, you know, cis women and they're like trans women are closer to cis women than they are with like cis men. There isn't enough research to back it up, but like it shouldn't matter if there's like a hidden gene that makes you gay or that makes you trans. Like just respect a human as a human, and if a trans woman says that they are a woman, then don't challenge that. Surgery also a very big question for me. On one side, I'm yes, please skip now. On the other side, I'm worried. What if it isn't the right thing for me? So the regret rate on it is like incredibly low. You should still work with like a therapist, with like an expert that you trust on figuring out if that is the right path for you. I can't make this decision for you. I can literally just tell you, this was my path. It helped me. If I'm going to do my pirate software moment, and I'm not talking about being a furry, I had gender dysphoria. Things that I've been struggling with. There are a lot of like superficial things. Like obviously, oh, you know, like, oh, I'm tall. The booba isn't big enough, or body fat redistribution. All these like superficial things. But a core issue that I always had was because of my anatomy, and I restricted myself because of it. I didn't go swimming. I didn't like showering. I didn't like going to the bathroom. I'd struggle sleeping because I always had like something between my legs that made me like uncomfortable. I didn't like wearing certain clothes because it reminded me of my anatomy, and all these things were just because of my anatomy. HRT, legal name change and whatnot, it helped with a lot of like superficial type things. Like obviously there are a lot of things that I can't change. For example, like I can never change my height or whatnot. But like a lot of my issues were caused because of my anatomy. And now fixing that anatomy like immediately solved issues like, oh, now I can go swimming. Oh, now I can shower. Oh, now I don't struggle with intimacy. Now I don't struggle with like wearing certain clothes and whatnot. And it solved a lot of things, and it helped me with like depression, anxiety, especially social anxiety. It gave me energy because it felt like, okay, now my life is actually about to start. I'm no longer like stuck in limbo and like being numb and whatnot. I'm still the same person, but like my energy is no longer being drained because of my anatomy. How old were you when you realized you were trans? I didn't know what being trans was, but I always knew that I'm not a boy. Fascinating. So would you say it was like a reverse phantom limb at times? I still knew my body. I was able to like physically touch it. I was able to perceive it. It was more like a tumor, something that just didn't belong. At least with that, it means you're taking it seriously and not just blindly jumping into it, which is a good path I'm figuring out. It's a huge decision. I'm not telling people it's like, oh, you know, you have dysphoria, go get your limbs chopped off. You know, that's what the right wants you to believe, but that's not actually what we're saying. You should like figure yourself out. What is actually the core issue when it comes to my gender dysphoria? Is it things like, oh, legal name change? Oh, you know, I want to grow my hair out. I want to present more feminine. I want to wear like more feminine clothing and whatnot. Then you go like lower. Okay, am I insecure because like my body's puberty doesn't align with how my gender identity is? You go through all these things, and like at the bottom, if you're like a trans man and it's like, oh, I feel insecure, I hate that I have to buy and I need to get the surgery, I can't go like shirtless outside, it makes me feel insecure and whatnot. And if you're a trans woman, it's like, oh, you know, like, okay, there's bottom surgery. Is that really the right path? And you really have to be sure. But like, this is why the regret rate is so incredibly low, because you go through all these changes and it's not like, okay, my boobs are too small, let me get surgery and let me make them bigger. No, that is what cis women do. Hearing what you say is impressively interesting, because for me, gender is more in my head and but I've rarely felt dysphoria. It sucks in society because like, even if you're like androgynous, people still put you in like either or category. People still like want to shove non-binary people into the binary box. That can be like incredibly frustrating. It's like, oh, you know, I'm actually like in the middle, and like it shouldn't matter what my body is. But no, people are just like, oh, nope, you don't fit into my worldview. And they use like things about your body or like how you present yourself to shove you into either or category. And it sucks. Like that can be really frustrating. It's kind of a break to make me feel along in the trans community. Like I love you all, and funny enough, I do get you, but I've always been content of my body. Trans is an umbrella term. Like non-binary people like fit in the trans community and they're valid, and you know, you shouldn't feel insecure if you don't have, like, you shouldn't feel invalid just because you don't have dysphoria. Trans doesn't mean that you have gender dysphoria. It doesn't mean that you want to have surgery. It doesn't even mean that you have to transition. It literally just means that your gender identity doesn't match your assigned gender at birth. I realized actually that all my life, I was just a person. I was just a child, and society just put the label boy on me. As a boy, I'm supposed to do boy stuff. I'm supposed to like boy things. Because I didn't like boy things, people called me a girl to like invalidate me, invalidate my gender identity. Puberty made me realize that I don't like masculine features. I don't like having a deep voice, but I need to have like a deep voice. I actually forced myself to speak deeper, to be passing and whatnot, to not have like the harassment. But I started to really reject masculinity. I really started to hate anything masculine about me. And then I started transitioning. I realized that, oh, I have to like do all these stereotypical things. I have to fulfill all these boxes in order to be seen as a woman. And that will never happen because a lot of things that I can't change. And I kind of like forced myself. I pushed myself into like this box. Like society pushed me in this box. And then I let society push me into this box because I thought I will never be seen as a woman if I'm not a stereotype. And I also had that like during therapy and whatnot, where I was like sitting there and I'm like, yeah, I'm trans, you know, I just want to dress like neutrally. I want to dress unisex. I don't want to do like all these stereotypical things. And my first therapist was like, nope, you're not trans then. You gotta do these things. You gotta live as the opposite gender to get access. And it's like, what does that even mean? To these people, it means fulfilling the stereotypes that society puts on what it means to be a woman. And now that I'm like through it and I have like bottom surgery and I'm like starting to transition, I'm re-evaluating my gender identity again. I don't mind masculinity. I prefer to be seen as a woman, and I like to embrace femininity, but I also like to just be in the middle. I literally want to do like masculine things, but be seen more as a tomboy instead of society thinking that I'm just a femboy because I like feminine things. I'm more of a tomboy than a femboy because I'm not a man, you know? I do like to dress up and like do things that I haven't been able to do in my entire life, because I was socialized as a boy. It's always so interesting because like all these TERFs and whatnot, they're like, oh, you're just men in dresses, you're cosplaying men and whatnot. When in reality, it's like, we're not even trying to fulfill this one stereotype. We just want to be ourselves, but be referred to with the pronouns and whatnot that like align with our gender identity. But how our gender expression is like independent from our gender identity, you know? Maybe you're somewhat like demigirl. I would have to look into it. I don't want to fulfill stereotypes to be seen as a woman. That's just what it is. Society just needs to move past stereotypes. If you let trans people exist, you can't oppress women with like gender. You can't push this idea that men are superior and women are inferior if men and women are equal. That's just what it is. It's literally just about gender-based oppression. That is the agenda. It's just about control. They want to push this idea that like, you know, men are inherently superior because they have like this biological advantage because of their chromosomes and whatnot. But in reality, we have statistics that show that no, actually, trans women don't have an advantage. But they use it as like a foot in the door to like have the moral high ground because they say that, oh, men aren't supposed to be in women's sports. Oh, men are stealing all the recognition for women. And it's like, yeah, but it's not in the way that you make it seem. It's more like, oh, you know, if you watch like a soccer match, if you watch football, men having an achievement and whatnot is like being celebrated. But if women have the same thing, it's like, oh yeah, but it's women's sports, so who cares? That's more the issue. That's how men are actually stealing the achievements from women, because society treats women's sports as lesser, because they push this idea that like men are inherently better than women. They're only hurting young trans girls who want to play volleyball with their friends. Yeah, it's just about ostracizing trans people, making us feel like we're other. Never cared for sports in general, still don't. I had transphobes for making me care about sports. I'm so sick of arguing with people as girls belong in women's sports. Yeah. And it's also like always like phrasing. 65% of people actually agree that men don't belong in women's sports. It's like, yeah, because you're phrasing the question in a dishonest way. If you would be like, hey, trans women are women, do you think they should compete in women's sports? And people are like, oh yeah, you know, actually that makes sense. There are rules that you need to follow in order to actually get access and like be able to compete. A lot of it is like, oh, you have to be on HRT for a year, for 2 years even. It also hurts intersex people so much, which isn't being addressed. Oh yeah, they're completely ignoring intersex people. Anytime someone is like, oh, XX equals woman and XY equals man, and you're like, hey, actually intersex people exist. They're like, oh, but these are exceptions. Like, yeah, but the exceptions, like they disprove you. So like, can you like acknowledge that intersex people exist and that it's not that straightforward? Like, not even talking about like biological sex not being the same as like gender identities and gender as a whole. Like, not even talking about that. Can we like acknowledge on a biological level that like intersex people are real and it's not like some big pharma propaganda? On average is an incredibly important phrase. Yeah, but they always dismiss that. It's so annoying. A lot of people don't even know they're intersex. People don't get their chromosomes checked. And like, maybe eventually it's going to like, people are going to come to the realization that trans people are actually intersex sex too. But the thing is, like, non-binary people are also trans people. So you can't really make that argument because you can't make it like just about genetics and whatnot. You try to explain it away. It kind of erases like gender identity and gender being a social construct. That's also what like these people do with like, oh, you know, there are only two genders, male and female. It's like, no, male and female aren't genders. They are biological sexes. And by saying that a biological sex is a gender, you're basically eradicating gender identities because you're making it about biology instead of what it actually is. It's a social construct. And it varies from culture to culture. Like our perception of gender as a whole has been shaped by European Christian white men. And even then you have like things where it's like, oh, you know, pink used to be a boy's color. And then suddenly it switched. And then these people are like, oh, it's biological. We can always tell. Ah! Native Americans had more than two. Yeah, like you even have it like in the, what is it? 8 genders of the Talmud. Male, female, androgynous, lacking sexual characteristics, identified female at birth but later naturally developing male characteristics, identified female at birth but later developing male characteristics through human interventions, which trans people would fall under, and the same for identified male at birth. You already had that like centuries ago. Biological sex is spectrum already. It is bimodal. Men wear dresses and high heels in the past. Oh yeah, I mean they still do. Biologically speaking, trans women that's been on HRT for like 1 year are biologically women. Oh yeah. It's the same with like, oh, you know, you're not real women. It's like, what the is a real woman? I'm definitely not artificial. I'm not a cyborg. The thing is like they also invalidate like cis women who are pro-trans. They're also invalidating cis women who don't exactly fit into their worldview. Meaning if they are tall, if their chin isn't, you know, how they want women to have chins. Once womb transplants happen for trans women, I'm curious what their new arguments against us will be. Wait till like brain transplants are going to be a thing and you can like switch bodies with that of a trans man. Oh, you go against God. Like they're just moving the goalpost. Like why are they invalidating trans people in the past? Because like they like raised the bar of what it means to be like trans. Oh, this emperor back then who like lived as a female slave and wanted to give away all his wealth for a doctor to give him a womb or whatnot, it wasn't actually a woman. Because, like, if they were a woman, then they would have known that they are trans. You have the same with, like, Stonewall. Trans women weren't fighting because they were just cross-dressers. They were just gay men. Like, no, they just didn't have the term of, like, what it means to be trans. Weirdest thing I heard now is that you have to be exclusively straight after transitioning to be trans. A lot of people invalidating trans women who are, like, lesbians because it's like, oh, you're just a man who loves women and you want to make the lesbians straight, so you invade their spaces and make them date you because they think that you're a woman, but you're actually not a woman, and they fall in love with you, and then they've been tricked by you into believing that they're actually straight. It's conversion therapy, and it's like, it's so funny if you're a trans woman and you're like pre-transitioning and you date a woman who is like, I don't know, bisexual or whatnot, or like they're questioning if they're a lesbian, but you're okay. You're the only man that they want to date, but like they don't actually want to date other men. That's how you can tell that trans women are women.